At my retirement party in Vancouver, my son-in-law grabbed the microphone and told 200 guests I was just a washed-up fisherman who got lucky marrying above his station. I'm Robert McLeod, and I'd kept quiet for 3 years. What Derek Sullivan didn't know was that his prestigious law firm, Henderson and Associates, had been collecting $1.8 million annually in legal fees from my company. He didn't know I owned the largest private shipping fleet on the West Coast, including the vessels that transported cargo for half his firm's clients. Tonight, his arrogance would cost him his partnership, his marriage, and his reputation in every boardroom from Vancouver to Toronto. Because when you humiliate a man who built a $900 million logistics empire from a single fishing boat, the consequences arrive faster than a Pacific storm. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded letter. My hands were steady. My voice would stay calm. But that letter would end everything Derek Sullivan had spent 15 years building. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever been dismissed because of your accent, your clothes, or your calloused hands? Here's how a quiet fisherman from Cape Breton taught a Bay Street lawyer that respect isn't inherited through a law degree. It's earned through decades of honest work and lost in a single evening of arrogance. 3 years ago, when my daughter Emily brought Derek home to our modest house in North Vancouver, I saw the calculation in his eyes before he even stepped through the door. He scanned our living room like an appraiser. The 20-year-old sofa my wife Helen had reupholstered twice. The wood stove in the corner that I'd installed myself. The family photos showing me on fishing boats, in rain gear, hauling nets with crews of weather-beaten men. "So, Mr. McLeod," Derek said, settling into our armchair like he was conducting an interview. "Emily tells me you spent your career in commercial fishing." The way he said commercial fishing made it sound like a cautionary tale. 42 years on the water, I replied. Started as a deckhand when I was 16. Worked my way up to captain. Good, honest living. Derek nodded with that particular smile people use when they're being polite about something they find beneath them. That's admirable. The fishing industry is so important for coastal communities. Someone has to do that work. Emily shot me a warning look. She knew that tone. She'd heard it before, in different contexts, from different people who thought manual labor was something to overcome rather than respect. Over the next 3 years, the comments became more frequent, more pointed. At family dinners, Derek would steer conversations away from my stories about storms on the Georgia Strait or the year we pulled in a record halibut catch. When I mentioned fixing the engine on my old truck, he'd make jokes about blue-collar solutions. When Emily's friends from her architecture firm visited, he'd introduce me as Emily's father, who was a fisherman. Never Robert, never by name, just Emily's father, who was a fisherman. The worst part was watching Emily start to do it too. "Dad, Derek's partners are coming for dinner," she'd say quietly. "Maybe don't mention the boat. They might not understand." What she didn't know was that the boat she was embarrassed about had become a fleet, and that fleet had become something much, much larger. At their engagement party 2 summers ago at the Fairmont Pacific Rim, Derek gave a speech to his Henderson and Associates colleagues about marrying into a humble working-class family. He talked about how it would keep him grounded, help him remember his roots, even though Derek Sullivan had never had roots anywhere near a fishing dock or a factory floor. 150 people applauded while I stood there holding my Canadian club, feeling like an exhibit in a museum about the disappearing working class. "My father-in-law taught me that honest work comes in many forms," Derek said, raising his glass toward me. "Even if it's not in a corner office downtown." The laughter was polite but pointed. Several of his colleagues glanced at me with that mixture of pity and condescension that professionals reserve for people they consider simple. I could have spoken up then. Could have shown him the business cards in my wallet, the corporate registration documents in my home office, the Globe and Mail article from 2019 that called me one of British Columbia's quiet titans of industry. But I didn't. Why? Because Emily loved him. Because she seemed happy. Because I remembered what it felt like to be 32 and trying to build a life and prove yourself to people who'd always had more than you. When I came to Vancouver from Cape Breton in 1981, I had $400 in my pocket and an accent so thick that people assumed I was uneducated. I'd learned to stay quiet, work hard, and let my results speak for themselves. For 40 years, that strategy had served me well. But tonight, at the Pan Pacific Hotel, surrounded by 200 guests celebrating my supposed retirement, Derek Sullivan was about to learn the difference between staying quiet by choice and staying quiet because you have nothing to say. The retirement party had been Emily's idea. She'd wanted to honor my 42 years in the fishing industry with a proper celebration. What she didn't know was that I wasn't really retiring. I was just stepping back from daily operations of a company that had grown far beyond anything she'd ever imagined. Helen and I had kept our wealth private. We'd lived in the same North Vancouver house we'd bought in 1989. We drove 10-year-old vehicles. We shopped at Costco and Canadian Tire. We'd raised Emily to be independent, to earn her own way, to never rely on family money she didn't know existed. The strategy had worked. Emily had graduated from UBC's architecture program with honors. She'd landed her position at a prestigious Vancouver firm on merit. She'd built a reputation based on her own talent and determination. But Helen had also said something else, near the end of her battle with cancer 2 years ago. "If anyone ever treats our family with genuine disrespect," she'd whispered, holding my hand in the hospice room, "you show them exactly who they're dealing with, Robert. Don't let anyone diminish what we built together." Tonight, Derek Sullivan had crossed that line. The party was elegant. Emily had rented out the hotel's main ballroom. White linens, fresh flowers, a string quartet playing soft jazz. She'd invited family, old fishing colleagues, neighbors, and of course, Derek's associates from Henderson and Associates. I watched Derek work the room, introducing Emily to his colleagues and superiors. "This is my wife, Emily. She comes from a modest background, but she's incredibly talented despite her circumstances. Emily's father is a simple man, salt of the earth type. We're so different, but opposites attract, right? Robert here spent his whole life on fishing boats. Honest work, if limited in scope." Each introduction made my chest tighter. Because what Derek Sullivan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the quiet man in the corner nursing his whiskey owned the company that shipped cargo for half the clients Henderson and Associates represented. The man they pitied for his simple life controlled a logistics empire that stretched from Vancouver to Halifax, with operations in 12 countries. As I stood near the bar, watching Derek introduce Emily to Margaret Chen, the managing partner of Henderson and Associates, I faced a choice that would define everything that followed. Stay quiet, and Derek would continue to diminish me for years. Our family gatherings would remain exercises in subtle humiliation. My future grandchildren would grow up thinking their grandfather was just the fisherman who couldn't understand their sophisticated world. But speak up, and I'd risk destroying Emily's marriage at my own retirement party. I'd humiliate her husband in front of his colleagues and superiors. The stakes were clear. Emily had built a solid career at her architecture firm. She was talented, capable, ambitious, but she was also married to a man who introduced her as coming from modest circumstances, like she was a reclamation project he'd generously undertaken. If I stayed silent tonight, that narrative would become permanent. Derek would spend the next 20 years explaining Emily's humble origins to justify why she deserved opportunities. He'd position himself as her generous savior, the successful lawyer who looked past her working-class family to see her potential. And Emily would start believing it. I'd already seen it happening. The way she'd apologized for my presence at their engagement party, the way she'd changed the subject when I mentioned business, the way she'd started saying we come from different worlds when talking about her childhood. My daughter was disappearing into Derek's version of her story. I thought about Helen. She'd built our financial foundation alongside me, managing the books while I managed the operations. She'd been the one who insisted we keep our wealth private. "Let Emily have a normal childhood," Helen had said. "Let her earn her own respect." We'd driven old trucks while owning $200 million in shipping assets. We'd lived modestly while building an empire. Helen's strategy had worked, but Helen had also given me permission, near the end, to defend our family if necessary. Tonight, Derek Sullivan had made it necessary. I finished my whiskey, set the glass on the bar, and walked toward my jacket hanging on a chair nearby. Inside the pocket was a letter that would change everything. The The moment came during the cocktail hour. Derek was holding court near the champagne fountain with Margaret Chen and 3 other Henderson and Associates partners. I approached their circle slowly. Derek saw me coming. His expression shifted to that look people get when an unwanted relative approaches during important professional conversation. "Dad," Emily said, appearing at my elbow. "Derek's just talking with his partners about firm business." "That's fine," I said quietly. "I'd like to introduce myself properly." Derek's laugh was nervous. "Actually, Robert, we're discussing a rather complex maritime shipping case. Might be a bit technical for someone outside the industry." His colleagues smiled politely. Margaret Chen glanced at her watch. "Try me," I said. "Dad, please," Emily whispered. Derek's smile widened. He was enjoying this. "Okay. We're representing Northern Pacific Logistics in a dispute with their insurance carriers over cargo damage claims. Very specialized maritime law. About $40 million in disputed claims." "Interesting," I said. "Which vessels were involved?" The smile faltered slightly. "Pardon?" "The damaged cargo. Which ships were carrying it? What routes?" One of his colleagues, a younger associate, looked curious. "The MV Pacific Venture and the MV Coastal Spirit, I believe. Vancouver to Shanghai route. Those are good ships," I said. "The Pacific Venture had some hull issues 2 years ago, but they were addressed in the Esquimalt dry dock. The Coastal Spirit is newer. Commissioned in 2019. Derek's jaw tightened. "The insurance dispute," I continued. "Is it about the refrigeration failure on the Pacific Venture? Because that was a known issue. The compressor systems on those older reefer holds are prone to failure in high humidity conditions." The circle went quiet. Margaret Chen was staring at me with new interest. "How would you know that?" Derek's voice carried an edge now. "You'd be surprised what you learn after 40 years on the water." Derek turned to his colleagues with exaggerated amusement. "Isn't this charming? Robert here thinks he understands maritime shipping law better than we do." Margaret Chen looked uncomfortable. "Derek, perhaps we should let your father-in-law speak." "No, this is wonderful," Derek continued. "Robert, since you're such an expert on shipping, maybe you should advise our client. Tell them how to handle their legal strategy." His colleagues shifted nervously. This was becoming awkward. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a simple white business card. "Your client might want to know who actually owns those vessels before they proceed with litigation." Derek took the card without looking at it. "Owns them? Northern Pacific Logistics owns them. That's who we represent." "Do they?" I met his eyes directly. "Those ships, the Pacific Venture and the Coastal Spirit, along with 23 other vessels in the Northern Pacific Fleet, they're all owned by a holding company called McLeod Maritime Holdings." Derek glanced down at the card for the first time. His expression changed as he read it. "Robert McLeod, Chairman and CEO, McLeod Maritime Holdings Limited." The color drained from his face. "Wait," he said slowly. "This is your company?" "That's right. But you're a fisherman." "I was a fisherman for 20 years. Then I bought my first cargo vessel in 1995. Then another. Then I started a logistics company." Margaret Chen stepped forward, her expression shifting completely. "Mr. McLeod, did you say McLeod Maritime Holdings?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at Derek, then back at me. "We've been trying to get a meeting with McLeod Maritime for 8 months. They control the largest private shipping fleet on the West Coast." Derek's hand was trembling slightly as he held the business card. "This is impossible," he said. "What's impossible?" "You can't own McLeod Maritime. They're worth hundreds of millions. 940 million at last valuation. We've grown significantly in the past few years." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Party guests continued chatting around us, unaware that Derek Sullivan's world was collapsing. "Dad." Emily's voice was barely audible. I turned to her with the same calm expression I'd worn all evening. "Yes, sweetheart? Is this real? Very real?" Derek was staring at the business card like it might burst into flames. "But why? Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Never seemed relevant. You never asked." "Never asked?" His voice cracked. "You let me think you were just a retired fisherman living on a pension." I am a retired fisherman. I'm also the owner of one of Canada's largest private shipping companies. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. But the house, the truck, the clothes. I like my house. The truck runs fine, my clothes are comfortable. Emily was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Your mother and I wanted you to build your own life. Make your own way. Succeed on your own merits. Not be the rich kid who got handed everything. Derek's colleague, the young associate who'd mentioned the ship names, cleared his throat. Mr. McLeod, we've been trying to contact your company about expanding our legal services relationship. Do you handle vendor selection personally? I smiled. Depends on the vendor. Derek made a choking sound. Margaret Chen extended her hand professionally. Mr. McLeod, I'm Margaret Chen, managing partner at Henderson and Associates. I believe we handle some legal work for subsidiaries of McLeod Maritime. That's right, since 2017. About $1.8 million annually in fees. Derek looked like he might collapse. The first round was over. 20 minutes later, Derek pulled me aside near the hotel's panoramic windows overlooking Cole Harbor. His confidence was returning. I could see the calculation in his eyes. He'd had time to think, and thinking was dangerous for a man like Derek Sullivan. Robert, I need to understand what's happening here. What's to understand? This business card, this company. He held up the card like evidence in court. I've worked in corporate law for 15 years. I know every major shipping company in Western Canada. I've never heard of McLeod Maritime Holdings. We keep a low profile. Nobody with $1 billion company keeps this low a profile. His voice was gaining strength. He was building a case in his mind, looking for the flaw, the explanation that would put me back in the box where I belonged. Maybe you're a minority shareholder. Maybe you sit on some advisory board. Maybe you did consulting work for them years ago. Maybe you should do your research before deciding what's possible. Derek was already pulling out his phone. Let me verify a few things. He walked to the corner, fingers flying across the screen. I watched him search, scroll, frown, search again. After 5 minutes, he returned with a puzzled expression. I can't find much about McLeod Maritime online. Corporate registry shows you as the registered director and officer, but there's no media coverage, no executive profiles on LinkedIn. I told you, we keep a low profile. But there's one thing. His eyes lit up with what he thought was victory. The Globe and Mail mentioned McLeod Maritime in 2019, some article about quiet titans of Canadian business. But they didn't use photos, just called the owner a reclusive shipping magnate from the West Coast. I nodded. So here's what I think happened, Derek said. His confidence was fully restored now. You saw that article. You had this business card made. You're playing some elaborate prank to embarrass me in front of my partners. Why would I do that? Because you're embarrassed about your background. Because you want to impress my colleagues. Because you resent my success. The accusation hung in the air. Derek, I said calmly, what's the address of Henderson and Associates? What? Your law firm. What's the address? 1055 West Hastings Street. Why? Nice building. The Bentall Center. 34 floors, Class A office space. Yeah. So? Your firm pays about $62 per square foot for that space. Prime downtown location. The lease runs through March 2028. Henderson and Associates occupies floors 18 through 21. Derek's face went pale. How could you possibly know our lease terms? Lucky guess. But I could see the doubt creeping back into his expression, because that number was exactly right. And there was no way a retired fisherman should know it. The Bentall Center is managed by Cadillac Fairview, I continued. But the actual ownership structure is more complex. McLeod Maritime Holdings acquired a 40% stake in the ownership consortium 3 years ago. Derek's mouth opened, closed, opened again. You'd have to be. He couldn't finish the sentence. Because to know those details, I'd have to be exactly who I claimed to be. Meanwhile, Emily had been watching this conversation from across the room. She approached us with Margaret Chen, who looked like she had something important to say. Dad, Emily said carefully, Margaret was telling me about your company. Margaret Chen smiled professionally. Mr. McLeod, I hope you don't mind. I called our office to pull your file. Derek straightened. Here it was, the proof that would expose my supposed deception. Henderson and Associates has handled approximately $47 million in contracts for McLeod Maritime Holdings and its subsidiaries since 2017. Margaret continued. Maritime law, corporate acquisitions, regulatory compliance. Derek's mouth fell open. Your company has been one of our most valued clients. We've been hoping to expand the relationship. Margaret looked confused. Derek, you told me Emily's family was blue-collar, working-class background. Derek's eyes darted between Margaret, Emily, and me. I need some air, he said suddenly. But as he started to walk away, Margaret called after him. Derek, wait. There's something else you should know. He stopped. Your office building. The Bentall Center. We've been reviewing our lease terms with the ownership consortium. Derek turned slowly. What about it? Margaret looked at me, then back at Derek. McLeod Maritime Holdings is the controlling partner in the ownership group. They've been your landlord for 3 years. The blood drained from Derek's face completely. That's not possible. I have the corporate documents in my car if you'd like to see them. Emily was staring at me with a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Dad, she said quietly, is she telling the truth? She is. So, every day, when Derek goes to work in that office tower, he goes to work in my building. Derek sat down heavily on a nearby bench. This can't be happening. But it was happening. And it was about to get much worse. Because Derek Sullivan had spent 3 years disrespecting the man who owned the ground beneath his feet. The man who paid for half his firm's operating budget through legal fees. The man whose company kept Henderson and Associates profitable. The question was whether Derek was intelligent enough to recognize his situation and apologize, or arrogant enough to keep digging his hole deeper. Based on everything I'd observed over the past 3 years, I suspected I knew which path he'd choose. The moment I knew there was no turning back came during the dinner toasts. Derek had retreated to the bar after learning about the building ownership. Instead of processing the information and adjusting his behavior, he'd started drinking heavily. By the time the main course was served, he'd consumed at least 5 glasses of wine. His cheeks were flushed. His eyes were bright with alcohol. His judgment was completely compromised. That's when he decided to give an impromptu speech. The string quartet had just finished playing. The natural lull gave Derek his opportunity. He stood up from his table, grabbed a microphone from the DJ stand, and waited for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, his voice carrying across the ballroom. If I could have your attention. The 200 guests turned toward him expectantly. Emily looked nervous. Several Henderson and Associates partners exchanged concerned glances. I want to talk about family tonight, Derek began, his words slightly slurred but clear enough for everyone to hear. About where we come from and where we're going. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. When I met Emily 3 years ago, I was struck by her determination to rise above her circumstances. He gestured toward our table. She comes from humble beginnings, working-class family, blue-collar background. A few guests nodded. This seemed like it might be a touching speech about overcoming differences. Derek was just warming up. Her father, Robert McLeod, represents everything that's honest and simple about old Canada. He worked on fishing boats for 40 years, manual labor, hauling nets, getting his hands dirty. Derek's smile was condescending, even as he pretended to praise me. Now, Robert has some interesting stories tonight about some shipping company he supposedly owns. McLeod Maritime, I think it was. A murmur went through the crowd. Margaret Chen looked deeply uncomfortable. I want to be clear. There's nothing wrong with having big dreams. Nothing wrong with wanting to impress people. Derek's tone was becoming openly mocking. But sometimes, when people feel insecure about their place in the world, they tell stories. They create fantasies about secret wealth and hidden success. Emily stood up. Derek, stop. No, sweetheart. This is important. Derek waved her off. Because what I've learned tonight is that respect has to be earned. And you don't earn respect by pretending to be something you're not. The ballroom was completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Robert McLeod is a good man, a simple man. He caught fish and raised a wonderful daughter. Derek raised his glass toward me. But he's not a shipping magnate. He's not hiding hundreds of millions of dollars. He's just a retired fisherman who wants to feel important at his own retirement party. Scattered, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. And that's okay, Derek continued. We can't all be successful in business. We can't all understand complex corporate structures and international shipping logistics. Some of us are meant to work with our hands. Some of us are meant to work with our minds. I watched my daughter's face crumble as her husband publicly humiliated her family. So, let's toast to honesty, Derek said, raising his glass higher. To knowing our place. To simple people living simple lives. And to successful people building something greater. The applause was confused and reluctant. Most guests sensed something had gone terribly wrong. But Derek wasn't finished. Robert, why don't you stand up? Let everyone see the real patriarch of the McLeod family. The man who caught fish for other people's tables instead of building something of his own. The mockery in his voice was unmistakable now. That's when I stood. The ballroom fell completely silent as I rose from my chair. 200 guests stared at me, waiting to see how the simple fisherman would respond to being publicly demolished by his own son-in-law. I walked slowly toward Derek. My jacket pocket felt heavy with the documents inside. Derek stepped aside with a smug smile, clearly believing he'd won. I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd. Margaret Chen was watching intently. Emily was fighting tears. The other guests were leaning forward. Derek makes some interesting points, I said quietly. About honesty. About knowing your place. Derek nodded approvingly. He's right that respect has to be earned. He's right that some people work with their hands, while others work with their minds. I could see Derek relaxing. He thought I was meekly accepting his assessment. What Derek doesn't understand, I said, reaching into my jacket, is that the most successful people do both. I pulled out a manila envelope. This is a corporate registration document, I announced. McLeod Maritime Holdings Limited, incorporated in British Columbia in 1995. Starting capital: one fishing vessel worth $180,000. Purchased with money I'd saved over 15 years of working on other people's boats. The silence was absolute. Current assets: 25 cargo vessels, 14 distribution centers across Canada, operations in 12 countries. Total enterprise value, according to our most recent audit, $940 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Derek is correct about one thing. I did work on fishing boats for 40 years. I learned the water. I learned the weather. I learned logistics and timing and what it takes to move cargo safely across the Pacific. I could see Derek's face losing all color. And then I started building something of my own. I pulled out another document. This is the client services agreement between Henderson and Associates and McLeod Maritime Holdings. Legal fees paid, $1.8 million annually for the past 7 years. Total billings, approximately $47 million. Margaret Chen nodded slowly, her expression mixing professional respect with barely contained fury at Derek. That makes Henderson and Associates one of our most important vendors. And it makes me one of Henderson and Associates' most important clients. The crowd was completely still. So Derek is absolutely right. We should know our place in the world. I looked directly at him. Your place is in my building, billing hours to my company, collecting fees from my subsidiaries. Your partnership, your corner office, your entire career has been funded substantially by the fisherman you've been mocking for 3 years. Derek's wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. The silence after the glass shattered lasted exactly 8 seconds. Then, Margaret Chen started laughing. Not cruel or mocking laughter. The laughter of someone who just understood a joke that had been building for years. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Derek, you've been condescending to our biggest client." Derek looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "What?" Margaret stood up, walked to the front of the room, and extended her hand to me. "Mr. McLeod, I owe you a personal apology. If I'd known who you were tonight, this entire situation could have been prevented. No apology necessary, I said, shaking her hand. But you're giving me one anyway. Margaret turned to address the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Margaret Chen, managing partner at Henderson & Associates. I've had the privilege of serving McLeod Maritime Holdings as a client for 7 years. She gestured toward me with obvious respect. Mr. Robert McLeod is one of Canada's most successful private shipping entrepreneurs. His company handles approximately 15% of all container traffic on Canada's west coast. The crowd was hanging on every word. McLeod Maritime has operations in Vancouver, Seattle, Los Angeles, Shanghai, Singapore, and Rotterdam. Mr. McLeod is, by any measure, one of British Columbia's most accomplished business leaders. Derek was gripping the edge of a table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He's also, Margaret continued with a grim smile, a major client who just witnessed one of our partners publicly humiliate him, which creates some significant professional liability issues for our firm. That's when the murmuring started, guests turning to each other, processing what they'd learned. The quiet man in the corner wasn't a simple retired fisherman. He was the person who funded a significant portion of the legal fees that paid Derek Sullivan's salary. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out another document from my envelope. This is a Globe and Mail article from October 2019. Quiet Titans, the Canadian billionaires you've never heard of. I held up the magazine page showing the headline. McLeod Maritime was featured as one of Canada's most successful private companies, built without outside investors, without taking on debt, without seeking publicity. Emily was staring at the article like she was seeing a ghost. The article estimated our net worth at $780 million. The current figure is closer to $940 million. We've had some good years since then. Derek made a sound somewhere between a groan and a whimper. Now, I said, looking out at the crowd. Derek was absolutely right about something. Respect does have to be earned. I turned to face him directly. The question is, what happens when someone shows profound disrespect to the person who's been quietly earning respect for 50 years? Derek tried to speak, but no words came out. For 3 years, I continued, I've listened to Derek explain to people that Emily comes from a modest background. I've watched him apologize for my presence at family gatherings. I've heard him tell colleagues that marrying Emily was an act of charity toward a working-class family. The crowd was completely captivated. I stayed quiet because I wanted Emily to build her own life, because I believed in letting people reveal their true character, because I thought respect would develop naturally once Derek understood what our family really represented. Emily was crying now, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of shame, relief, or something else entirely. Instead, Derek used my silence as permission to diminish everything I built, everything Helen and I sacrificed for, everything our family represents. I pulled out one final document. This is the ownership registration for this hotel, the Pan Pacific Vancouver. I held it up for everyone to see. Acquired by McLeod Maritime Holdings in 2021 as part of our hospitality investment portfolio. Several guests gasped audibly, so Derek gave his speech about knowing our place. In my hotel, after spending 3 years collecting fees from my company, while working in my building, while married to my daughter, Derek finally found his voice. Robert, I didn't know. You didn't know because you never bothered to find out. You assumed. The ballroom was so quiet, you could hear the boats in the harbor outside. You assumed that because I worked on fishing boats, I was uneducated. You assumed that because I drove an old truck, I was unsuccessful. You assumed that because I had an accent from Cape Breton, I was beneath your sophisticated Toronto upbringing. Derek's face was completely white now. But here's what you should have assumed, Derek. If a man can raise a daughter like Emily, if he can build a life that produces that kind of intelligence and determination and grace, then maybe there's more to that man than your assumptions allow. The crowd erupted in applause, but I held up my hand for silence. The tragedy here isn't that you underestimated me. The tragedy is that you've spent 3 years making my daughter apologize for where she came from. I looked at Emily, who was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. Emily McLeod is the daughter of a shipping magnate who built a near-billion-dollar company from a single fishing boat. She never needed you to lift her up. She never needed you to explain her worth to anyone. She was already valuable before you ever met her. The applause this time was thunderous. But as the crowd clapped, I watched Derek's expression change. From shock to humiliation to something darker. Rage. And I realized that a man who could spend 3 years systematically diminishing his wife's family wasn't going to accept this reversal gracefully. He was going to fight back, which meant the real confrontation was just beginning. Derek's rage erupted exactly 4 minutes after the applause died down. He grabbed the microphone from my hands with shaking fingers, his face twisted with humiliation and fury. "This is complete garbage," he shouted, his voice echoing through the ballroom. The crowd went silent with shock. "You want to know the truth? This is all fabricated. Documents can be forged. Business cards can be printed. This is just a bitter old man who can't accept that his daughter married someone more successful than he ever was." Margaret Chen stood up. "Derek, you need to stop talking. Right now." "No." He pointed an accusing finger at me. "I've worked my entire career to build something. I earned my partnership. I'm not going to be humiliated by some retired fisherman with a folder full of fake papers." Emily stood up too. "Derek, stop it. You're drunk." "I'm drunk?" Derek laughed bitterly. "I'm the only sober person here. Everyone else is falling for this ridiculous con." He turned back to the crowd. "You want proof he's lying? Call McLeod Maritime tomorrow. Ask to speak to Robert McLeod. See what happens. I guarantee this man has never made a business decision more complex than deciding which nets to use." Margaret Chen walked to the front of the room, pulled out her phone, and held it up. "Actually, Derek, I can call right now." "What?" "McLeod Maritime has a 24-hour operations line for shipping emergencies." She held up her phone. "I have the number because we handle their legal work." Derek's confidence wavered. "That doesn't prove anything." Margaret dialed. The phone rang through the ballroom speakers, connected to the microphone system. After 2 rings, a professional voice answered. "McLeod Maritime Operations Center. This is Jennifer. How may I assist you?" Margaret looked directly at Derek. "Hi, Jennifer. This is Margaret Chen from Henderson and Associates. I'm here with Mr. McLeod at a family event. We're having some confusion about his role with the company. Could you verify his identity?" "Of course, Miss Chen. Is Mr. McLeod available?" Margaret handed me the phone. "Jennifer, this is Robert. Can you tell these folks what my position is with the company?" "Certainly, Mr. McLeod. You're the founder, chairman, and CEO of McLeod Maritime Holdings Limited. Would you like me to read your official biography?" "Please." Jennifer's voice filled the ballroom. Robert McLeod founded McLeod Maritime in 1995 with the purchase of a single cargo vessel, the MV Helen Marie, named for his late wife. Over 29 years, he built the company into one of Canada's largest private shipping enterprises, with 25 vessels, operations in 12 countries, and an enterprise value exceeding $900 million. Derek was staring at the phone like it was poisonous. "Mr. McLeod is known in the industry for his hands-on management style and his commitment to crew welfare. He personally captained vessels for the first 10 years of the company's operations. He's considered one of British Columbia's most respected business leaders." "Thank you, Jennifer," I said, ending the call. The ballroom was completely silent. Derek's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. That's when I pulled out one final document from my jacket. "Derek," I said quietly, "I tried to give you a chance to apologize, to show some humility, to demonstrate that you understood the situation." His eyes were fixed on the paper in my hand. "Instead, you doubled down. You called me a fraud. You accused me of fabricating documents. You humiliated my daughter on a night that was supposed to celebrate our family." I unfolded the document. "This is a letter to Henderson and Associates Partnership Committee, documenting this evening's events. Derek Sullivan's public intoxication, his unprofessional conduct toward a major client, his defamatory statements made in front of 200 witnesses." Derek tried to grab the letter. I moved it out of reach. "This letter," I continued, "recommends immediate review of Derek Sullivan's partnership status, given the significant liability his behavior creates for the firm." Margaret Chen was looking at Derek with undisguised contempt. And this, I said, producing another document, is a notice of intent to review our legal services relationship with Henderson and Associates. Given tonight's events, McLeod Maritime will be evaluating whether to continue our $1.8 million annual retainer with your firm. Margaret's face went pale. Mr. McLeod, surely we can discuss this privately. We can, I said. But Derek's continued presence at your firm will be a significant factor in that discussion. Derek looked around the ballroom desperately, seeking support from the 200 guests who had just witnessed his spectacular destruction. He found none. Emily, he pleaded, turning to his wife. Say something. Tell them this is insane. Emily looked at her husband with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, analytical, final. I think you've said enough for both of us tonight. The next 72 hours unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Monday morning, Margaret Chen called an emergency meeting with Henderson and Associates Management Committee. By noon, Derek Sullivan's partnership was suspended pending a formal review of his conduct. By Tuesday, word had spread through Vancouver's legal community. The Vancouver Sun business section ran a brief item, law firm partner under review after confrontation with major client. They didn't name Derek specifically, but everyone in the industry knew. By Wednesday, Derek's suspension had become a termination. 3 headhunters, who'd been courting him for years, stopped returning his calls. His reputation in Vancouver's corporate law community was destroyed. Emily stayed with me that first week while Derek moved out of their Cole Harbor condo. She didn't say much, just sat in the living room where she'd grown up, processing the complete collapse of everything she'd believed about her family and her marriage. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked on Thursday evening. We were sitting on the back deck, watching the sun set over the North Shore Mountains. The same deck where I'd taught her to ride a bike, where we'd celebrated her university graduation, where she'd brought Derek for Sunday dinners for 3 years. Your mother and I wanted you to be proud of what you built yourself, but Derek made me feel ashamed of where I came from. That wasn't about where you came from. That was about his character. Emily was quiet for a long time. I should have defended you, she said finally. You were trying to keep your marriage together. I understand that, but it wasn't a marriage. It was just me shrinking myself to fit his expectations. That word shrinking hung in the air between us. Emily, look at me. She turned, and I saw Helen's eyes looking back at me. Strong, intelligent, uncompromising. You are the daughter of Robert and Helen McLeod. Your mother built our family's foundation while raising you to be independent. I built our financial foundation while teaching you that work has dignity, no matter what form it takes. Her eyes were bright with tears. You graduated top of your class from UBC. You earned your position at one of Vancouver's best architecture firms on merit. You've built everything you have through your own talent and determination. I reached over and took her hand. Derek Sullivan didn't elevate you. He diminished you, but I let him. Because you loved him. Because you wanted your marriage to succeed. Because you tried to see the best in someone who wasn't worthy of your generosity. I squeezed her hand gently. That doesn't make you weak, Emily. That makes you generous. But generosity has limits, and Derek crossed them. The following month, Emily filed for divorce. Derek contested it, naturally. He hired Vancouver's most aggressive family lawyer and tried to claim that I'd interfered with his marriage, destroyed his career through malicious deception, and owed him compensation for his professional losses. His lawyer lasted exactly 1 week. The moment they saw the documentation of Derek's behavior, the video evidence from the retirement party, the testimony from Margaret Chen, the letter from Henderson and Associates confirming his termination for conduct unbecoming, they withdrew from the case. Derek ended up representing himself in mediation, where he demanded half of Emily's supposed inheritance. Mr. Sullivan, the mediator explained patiently, your wife has no claim to her father's business holdings. Those assets are Mr. McLeod's personal property, held in corporate structures that predate your marriage. But they were hidden. She didn't know about them. That doesn't create a marital asset. If anything, it demonstrates that Mr. McLeod deliberately kept his wealth separate from your household. Derek walked away from the marriage with exactly what he'd brought into it, Nothing but his arrogance and a destroyed reputation. By the following summer, Emily had rebuilt her life completely. She took a position at a new architecture firm, one that valued her talent without any connection to my business. She bought a townhouse in Kitsilano, close enough to visit, but far enough to maintain her independence. Derek moved to Calgary, where he eventually found work with a smaller law firm at half his previous salary. His reputation in Vancouver was permanently damaged, and the legal community has a long memory. The ripple effects continued for months. Margaret Chen reached out personally to apologize and to propose expanding our business relationship. Henderson and Associates, under new leadership, now handles $3.2 million annually in legal work for McLeod Maritime. The Globe and Mail article from 2019 was republished online with an updated profile. This time, I agreed to a full interview. Success isn't about proving yourself to people who don't respect you, I told the reporter. Success is about building something so solid that their respect becomes irrelevant. The article went viral across Canada. 6 months later, I received an invitation to speak at the University of British Columbia's Sauder School of Business about entrepreneurship and quiet leadership. 300 students attended. Many of them were first-generation Canadians, kids from working-class families who looked like I had 50 years ago. Never let anyone make you apologize for where you started, I told them. And never let anyone convince you that quiet dignity is the same as weakness. After the lecture, a young man approached me. He had an accent I recognized immediately. Cape Breton, like mine, had been decades ago. Mr. McLeod, I'm working on fishing boats to pay for business school. People tell me I should be embarrassed about manual labor. What's your name? Kevin McDonald. Kevin, let me tell you something. The people who look down on honest work are usually the people who've never built anything lasting. You keep working. Keep learning. Keep building. I handed him my business card. When you graduate, call me. McLeod Maritime is always looking for people who understand what real work means. 18 months later, Kevin McDonald became our newest operations manager. Because the best response to people who underestimate you isn't destruction. It's building something so substantial that their opinions become footnotes in your success story. 2 years after the retirement party, Emily remarried. His name is James Patterson, a marine engineer who designs sustainable shipping systems for the Port of Vancouver. When she brought him to Sunday dinner for the first time, he shook my hand firmly and said, "Mr. McLeod, Emily tells me you built something remarkable from one fishing boat. I'd love to hear about your journey. No assumptions, no condescension, just genuine respect and curiosity about our family's story." During dinner, when James asked about my transition from fishing to shipping logistics, Emily jumped in. Dad started with one cargo vessel and built it into a near billion-dollar company over 29 years. He's one of the most successful private business owners in British Columbia. Her voice carried pride, not apology. "That's incredible," James said. "What was your biggest challenge in those early years?" We talked for 3 hours about cash flow management, vessel acquisition strategies, crew development, and market timing. James asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to the answers. He treated my experience as valuable, not quaint. When he left that evening, he thanked me for dinner, complimented Emily on her family, and asked if he could return the following week. "I like him," I told Emily after he'd gone. "Why?" "He sees you clearly. He sees us clearly. He doesn't need to diminish anyone to feel confident in himself." 6 months later, James proposed, not with a speech about different backgrounds or humble origins or marrying across class lines. Just, "Emily McLeod, you're the most intelligent, capable, remarkable woman I've ever known. Will you marry me?" She said yes. Their wedding was smaller than the first one. 80 guests instead of 200. James's colleagues from the maritime engineering world. Emily's friends from her architecture firm. Family from both sides. I walked Emily down the aisle again, but this time her smile was different. Confident, uncompromised, free. During his toast, James said, "I'm not marrying into Emily's family. I'm joining it, and I'm honored to become part of a legacy built on hard work, integrity, and quiet strength." No one mentioned humble backgrounds. No one discussed working-class origins. No one made jokes about fishing boats or blue-collar roots. Just a man celebrating the woman he loved and the family that shaped her. After dinner, James pulled me aside. "Mr. McLeod, I want you to know something. I'm not intimidated by your success. I'm inspired by it." I looked at him carefully. "That's the difference between you and the last one." Emily told me about Derek, about the party, about everything that happened. What did you think? I think he received exactly what he earned. And I think Emily learned something important about standing up for the people she loves. James was right. Emily had learned. She'd learned that love without respect is just enabling. She'd learned that family loyalty matters more than keeping peace. She'd learned that she never needed anyone's permission to be proud of where she came from. These days, Emily runs her own architecture firm, specializing in sustainable maritime infrastructure. She's particularly passionate about projects that serve coastal communities, the kind of places where I grew up, where working families build lives through honest labor. People who understand hard work understand value, she tells her partners. They don't take anything for granted. James's engineering company was acquired last year by a major maritime technology firm. He's now their chief sustainability officer, leading initiatives that are transforming how Canadian ports operate. When reporters ask about his success, he always mentions his wife's family. "Emily taught me that real strength is quiet," he says. "That real power doesn't need to announce itself. That the most successful people are often the ones you'd never suspect." As for Derek Sullivan, I hear he's doing adequately in Calgary. Remarried to someone who appreciates his stories about his time at a prestigious Vancouver law firm. I hope he's learned something from our encounter. I hope he treats his new wife's family with more respect. But honestly, I don't think about Derek Sullivan very often anymore. Because the most important lesson from that retirement party wasn't about revenge or consequences or proving people wrong. It was about knowing your worth, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes it. Respect isn't something you inherit through degrees or titles or corner offices. It's something you earn through decades of honest work. And something you can lose in a single evening of arrogance.